Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you followed our podcast for long, you've probably heard about the Next Economy MBA. What you might not know is that we wrote a book about it, and it's coming out on May 23rd. The Next Economy MBA book combines our experience working with Next Economy organizations and over 400 alumni that have taken our course. It's designed for impact leaders who seek to develop a business strategy from a socially just and environmentally regenerative perspective. This book is a great way to dive deeper into the principles and case stories we discuss on the podcast and includes a workbook to put learnings from the program into practice. You can pre-order a copy for yourself or a friend at lifteconomy.com/MBA book. Thanks for listening. And now on to the show.
Welcome to the MBA Series. This is a special multi-part series within Next Economy Now. We are going to review the arc of the learning journey that is presented in the Next Economy MBA online course. We are open sourcing the content from our course and hope to share it in this shorter, bite-sized format. We are launching this series because we were asked to do it by listeners like you. We're also doing it because we are writing a book titled The Next Economy MBA, Redesigning Business for the Benefit of All Life, which will be published on May 23rd, 2023 by Barrett Kohler Publishers. This is a sizable series. There will eventually be 18 podcast episodes of course content and 9 interviews with MBA alumni. We will be rotating every other week with our normal Next Economy Now interview format. We hope you enjoy it. Please reach out to us via our website, lifteconomy.com, with any comments, feedback, or requests. And now, on with the show.
Welcome to the Next Economy MBA podcast series. This is episode 19, where we're going to be discussing Operations 1, Part 1, Organization Structure, Roles, and Tasks. My name is Kevin Bayuk. I'm a worker owner at Lift Economy. And today I'm joined by Sean.
Hey everybody, Sean Barry here, also a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy.
Super excited to talk to you today, Sean, about organization structure, something that comes up a lot in working with Next Economy organizations from their design perspective and how they operate. And there's a number of issues that we find that depending on what stage of development an organization is, they kind of run into some challenges. And a lot of those challenges stem at the highest level, I think, from when you have Next Economy ethics and values. You want to deliver needed goods and services to your community in ways that benefit all life. So with those values, the business as usual normal structures, the norms of business as usual, which tend to have hierarchy, power over command and control type structures, there tends to be an allergy naturally to having that type of conforming to those business as usual norms. And so organizations working in the Next Economy tend to have flat, non-hierarchical, communitarian, cooperative, or another word might be familial type organizations where there's high warmth and ideally a lot of trust, but without having some structures to organize the activities of the organization for roles and responsibilities, that familial kind of non-hierarchical approach can sometimes be a major overcorrection. And we see patterns of lack of accountability. We see patterns of balls being dropped where it's like, okay, whose task was it to respond to that or to do this? And ultimately, you can find enough discord within an organization that's taking that approach that the trust starts to fade away. And without trust at the kind of base of the pyramid within an organization, it becomes very difficult to effectively solve problems, to commit to delivering things. And ultimately, the biggest outcome of not bringing attention to organization structure is the lack of the viability to sustain the organization. Sean, is that consistent with kind of what you see in your work and what we talk about in the Next Economy MBA?
Yes, absolutely. And so it's important to say we're really interested in the outcomes, right? We're really interested in the impact of these organizations being able to offer their beneficial products or services to a certain community. We're not interested in structure for just the sake of structure or because somebody said we should, right? What we're ultimately interested in is that these organizations are functioning and that we have functional collaboration across the team. Without the Next Economy vision and values, this can sound a lot like business as usual stuff. And even look like it with org charts and task lists and roles and responsibilities, et cetera. So, and like you were saying with this, there tends to be a reaction or an allergy to it. And so what we're kind of suggesting and what we've seen, right, working with all the teams we've worked with is a both and, both the vision and values and the impact we want to see in the world and some clarity around what's the structure of the organization, who's doing what, what's our team formation, how do we know who's doing what when so we can collaborate and ultimately achieve better outcomes with, again, that focus on really committing to making the world a better place rather than feeling great about our theory of change statement out in the world, but maybe when it comes down to it, the organization isn't really advancing the mission.
And so that advancement of the mission and achieving outcomes is the focus and informs kind of our thinking on organizational design and what we coach and share with other organizations for them to adopt different ways of going about it. I think it's worth just naming for a moment that some people we meet with will say, like, I'm the founder, I started this thing, and all my life I've seen the efficiency. I don't have time to really do the deep collaboration and stakeholder aligning or take time to define all the tasks that I'm doing. I just need to get them done in order to be viable as an entity. And the fastest way I can see to get them done is for me to make decisions and for kind of that militaristic type of chain of command, offer commands and demands to people who work under me, if you will, to get more work done so that I could expand my personal capacity. And, a lot of that, the idea that that's efficient is probably informed by lived experience and also popular narratives. The power over militaristic kind of chain of command can be effective for achieving outcomes efficiently. However, there's side effects that are probably less than desirable given the Next Economy values. So it's worth maybe touching on some of those. So one of the common side effects we see is disenfranchisement. Whatever indicator you want to use, quiet quitting or the awful statistics of how many people don't feel empowered or don't enjoy their vocation or job, the fact that people hate Mondays or love the weekends, this disenfranchisement, this lack of agency that can come from not having autonomy to make decisions. We also see another kind of side effect is that information in a command and control structure tends to get siloed. Accurate information about what's happening on the ground in a particular situation might not actually reach the people making decisions, especially if it's bad information that could be really useful for making informed decisions, because that bad information might be perceived as something that might threaten somebody's livelihood. And so you tend to get bad information flows. And then sometimes in those types of organizations, you can get competition for resources where like fiefdoms or politics get involved, or one group is trying to get as much resources as possible and not be transparent with their use of resources or information. And then another trope that I want to mention that people can get hung up on is the titles being more important, titles and roles and compensation, like roles instead of being defined by the work that's being done, which we'll talk about later, but roles being defined by a particular descriptor, project manager, senior vice president, whatever it is, the title becomes more important and oftentimes that's associated with compensation banding. So there's good reasons why people get attached to these kind of stories, but they can really get in the way, like you said, of actually achieving the outcomes that an organization wants to achieve. What would you add? Anything you want to add to that, John?
Yeah, absolutely. That is unfortunately a common experience, especially if you look at statistics around like the disengagement of the American workforce, right? Is tragically disengaged. What we'd like to raise is the possibility of how wonderful it could be. And not just could be, but how wonderful it is at organizations that truly engage the potential of their staff. I want to start with that of just how brilliant people are. Humans are so intelligent. This idea that certain people are either more intelligent or more thoughtful or possess greater leadership to make decisions over other people is actually wrong. And it's maybe a mistake of history that's been propagated. But so there's an invitation, right, to expand the possibilities of what could be done with a team of people. And again, this isn't fictional. We have great data and research and results from teams that actively collaborate. But I will say there is some work to get there. And you're actually correct, right? There is some efficiency to like the command and control structure that it's in today. We need to get this done. I said, get it done, go and do it. And so on a short time frame, probably could be correct that sticking with that system, we might get more done in a short term. What we'd like to invite is this idea of there might be, we heard it called go slow to go fast, or kind of slow down, make some changes, get everybody on the same page, do some training, create some understanding. Some tools that we see in this segment of our training are, we call it generally org structure, but like an org chart. So what does the organization look like with an image that might show every department in the organization and how they might be connected to each other? So getting everybody on the same page of how does it work, and then who's working in what area, and what tasks do they actually have, and what are the decision-making guidelines around each task. So again, with these kind of implicit structures that are more focused on titles, sometimes they have an org chart, but it's really an accountability chart, and it shows who's reporting to who, and it does look like that pyramidic structure with the leaders at the top and then everybody reporting up to them. But as you pointed out, that tends to create poor information flows and then limits the outcomes of the organization. So if we don't have that constraint and actually people know who's doing what, and there's more of an open collaborative nature, we actually do see organizations producing, efficiency and better outcomes. So that's where the go slow, get on the same page, create a structure, create the awareness of who's doing what, and then delegative authority and independent action. And then we see a lot happening, right? And see a lot of efficiency coming out. And not only results, maybe a typical organization, if we're thinking about sales and performance, et cetera, but you also see something like staff coming alive, right? And bringing their passion and their imagination and their creativity to their domain, because now they're crafting and shaping their departments and working on things they're passionate and talented about, and bringing their creativity to solving novel problems instead of passing the buck up or down the command chain. So that's kind of the invitation is, if you're noticing that you might have room for improvement in doing things the old way, then this kind of slow down, deeper dive, really examine it, create a new structure. And then on the far side, you might see this efficiency and enhanced fulfillment, well-being, right? And then that translates all the way, all stakeholders. Customers are happy, partners, vendors, everybody you're dealing with is happy because you're working with inspired, focused, happy, collaborative people that are creating great results.
You mentioned a few things there that I would love to underscore. For those of you listening, in the Next Economy MBA training, we've been inspired by Frederic Laloux and reinventing organizations. And there's a number of case stories that are in that book, Bertsorg, AES, Morningstar, some self-managing organizations that have some of those impacts with regarding performance and resilience of organizations are explicated through their kind of org structuring through a more self-managing organization. But you mentioned a few things there that are important. So domains or departments, some of these words are interchangeable, but we find like one of the critical success factors to doing a non-hierarchical organizational design would be to have those areas, domains, departments, again, whichever internal nomenclature is most familiar to your stakeholders, would be to be as clear and comprehensive as possible. So defining those areas. And we have some templates that we offer from the Next Economy MBA and through the book on how to do that definition. And we offer some potential structures to use in terms of, Sean said, like visualizing the different org areas and domains take a lot of inspiration there from sociocracy and holacracy and some of the other ways of looking at governance as well as structure using circles and interlinking circles. They don't have to be circles. Visually, that's an effective way, I think, to represent an organization, but it could be interlocking areas or domains or groups, and you could represent it however is effective for you. But the key there is having each org area having a very clear charter, a very clear and comprehensive description of what this area is, what's within its domain. Examples are good. Go ahead and list off, 10, a dozen examples of the types of things that this org area does or accomplishes that's relevant to your organization. Then you'll probably won't have everything captured the first time you try and articulate that. So set up some rhythms for revision and augmentation, editing. Those rhythms might be every season, or as a more mature organization, maybe once a year, saying what are the evolving aspects to each of these domains. The common domains that we advocate for, whatever nomenclature you use, we break organizations into 3 large domains, which would be design, revenue, and admin. Design layer, if you will, includes what we would call vision, culture, strategy, and operations as org areas. Again, the nomenclature, if you want to call those departments or change the word strategy to management or a more familiar term, all the terminology, all the semantics are fungible. But having a structure that has a notion that there are some tasks that are more about designing the organization or working on the organization rather than working in the organization. We find that to be very helpful and essential because a lot of organizations we work with kind of bypass or skip that stuff or use the word implicit earlier, Sean, like they just keep it implicit rather than explicit. That second layer we call revenue, and that's kind of the place where most of the energy of the organization goes. Revenue, some people might label it operations. Again, fungible semantics as to how you label it. We just have some templates that are available. Within revenue, we oftentimes have the org areas, marketing, sales, delivery, service. And like Sean said, you can hear some business as usual terminology that your co-op or your nonprofit or group might have an allergy to. And again, you can redefine the terms, but usually the functions of those org areas are consistent across most organizations that we've worked with, trying to build next economy institutions. And then the third layer we talk about is admin. That can include org areas like IT, accounting, office, legal. There's different aspects to that. And some of the big distinctions are once you have kind of an org area nomenclature and a definition defined, explicit, transparently explicit to everybody in the organization what each org area does, then there's a few things that you could do with that kind of construction. Again, we offer a lot of templates to help support this, but there's a number of ways to use that structure. Sean, do you want to highlight some of the ways in which that structure could be utilized, capacity, et cetera?
Yes, absolutely. And first of all, as Kevin's saying, shared transparently is this awareness, right, of what does it look like? I like to use, not everybody's into sports, but like this kind of analogy of who's in what position on the field of play, So it's so like, what's our formation on our team while we're doing the work of our business? This awareness of what's everything involved, the big picture, the wholeness of it. And again, we're empowering and engaging the implicit intelligence of our team, right? People are brilliant. So the idea that don't tell them what everybody else is doing, just tell them to get to work, we're missing the opportunity of really inviting them in. So again, this big picture understanding of what's everything that happens. And then, like Kevin was saying about defining what does each department do, now we have this efficiency of those people in that department, they already know what their tasks are. And so when new things come, we don't have to discuss of who's going to do what thing. It already lands squarely in one department and on those people's task lists or role description. And so that's where we get into some of the efficiency. And so that's one of the main things that we can do with this is writing out a detailed role description. It's basically for the entire organization, but also what it can do is roll up into very discrete and descriptive individual role descriptions for each team member. And especially with a lot of the organizations that we work with are smaller. And so you do have team members that are across departments. Even if you're a big organization, it's not, the same principle applies. But so instead of a business as usual economy context, if I'm the operations director, well, it's kind of assumed of some of the things that I might do. But that word specifically, in my experience, is like almost everybody I've talked to has a different understanding of what that means and what you would be doing. If that's how it is and that's my role, then I can kind of have a pretty wide swath of what I choose to do with it. Rather, if we use this framework and say, okay, under operational systems, which is how we define that area, these are my specific tasks. I develop and maintain an operating projection for the organization. Okay, that's very discrete. It's very specific what that function is. I set and adapt the organizational rhythms for the company as a whole.
Can I make one distinction there that I think is important? Is when the tasks are defined for a org area, we often suggest that those tasks are what that org area is accountable for. And similarly for an individual. That doesn't mean that every task that you do is just you and your work alone and not seeking advice or collaboration from others. So in a previous session and part of the MBA book and the training, we talked about governance and different ways to do delegative authority and having a decision zone chart. So you know what your decision-making methodology, like are we using consensus, are we using consent, or are we using self-management here, or the advice process? And so when somebody's completing a task that they're accountable for, it doesn't mean that it's all on them and that they're alone in doing that. There could still be broad collaboration through a number of tasks, but the person who has that task on their list, it means that they're accountable to be, did it get done or not? Whether or not they did it themselves or with a group of people, it's like, did that task get complete? That's what that person is accountable for. And we use this word accountability, and we've talked about it a few times throughout this series. That's where a lot of challenges emerge for Next Economy organizations that are horizontal and communitarian is what happens when something doesn't get done? How do we hold the other person or people accountable for what they are committed to? Well, kind of ipso facto, if you don't know what they're committed to because you don't have an explicit, transparent set of tasks, then you can never hold anybody effectively accountable. Now, if you have that system of specificity where the tasks are actually defined in terms of what they're accountable for, that's the first step. But it also doesn't mean that accountability has to show up as punishment and wrongness. Accountability, we talk about for these types of horizontal organizations, the presumption around accountability is when something doesn't get done, is that the person who is accountable for that task needs some form of support. So, hey, I noticed this didn't get done. What support do you need if you have this as your commitment? And by greeting accountability with that framework, we might find out, hey, they're actually over capacity, or they need training, they didn't know how to do it, or they didn't understand the task. So there's a lot of responses that could come for correcting something, that a task that didn't get completed effectively. Simultaneously, I just want to add this in here because I'd be remiss if I didn't. So system of specificity is required for accountability. Second thing is greeting it with support. But you probably also do need consequences in case there's a continuation of the lack of completing of tasks. And consequences are best defined ahead of time, upfront, and transparently available for everybody. So it's like, what happens if, a task is not completed, or a certain set of tasks are not completed, or a body of tasks is scored through a review process on a certain qualitative and quantitative matrix of assessment by oneself and peers under a certain threshold over a certain period of time after support and training have been offered and supplied. What then are the consequences? Ultimately, potentially with one of the consequences being separation from the organization because the commitment is not there. And that happens. That happens in all groups for a variety of reasons. But the best practice is to have those consequences defined upfront in advance. So if you find yourself in an organization right now and you're like, what are the consequences for holding each other accountable if it doesn't work out, then you don't know what they are, take that as a red flag and be like, okay, I need to go back and define share transparently. Sean, anything you want to say about task lists and accountability stuff?
Yeah. So again, kind of flowing out of this idea of having a coherent org structure that we understand, and we're moving away from just a title or a role if I'm a director or a lead of one area, then what we can have is I can be present across the organization in multiple departments, but every department I'm in, I have at least one discrete accountable task that's a repeating task, right? So my job description, instead of being neatly summed up into a title, you can have a title and that's effective to communicate something complex, especially externally. But when it comes down to it, my job description is actually a discrete list of individual tasks that may or may not be in the same department. And then they can, like you're saying, on an accountability mechanism, or what we think of as a support mechanism, right? Is one by one, each line, how is the performance? And is the result that the task, the reason why you have the task, is that result happening? And if not, what's the support you need? And again, it's there's this bias towards support rather than punitive or punishment. But of course, if the support doesn't work, then we need to do something. But one of the nice things about this system is that any one of those accountabilities or tasks can be swapped to a different team member, or be rolled up for a new team member as a new job description. So it takes the pressure off you having to do all of your tasks, right all the time. And it actually allows the organization to fine tune over time and really feature the skill set, the experience, and the interests of each individual by making sure that at least the tasks are being performed to a functional or adequate level, if not excellent or exemplary. And then anything that is underperforming, there's a lot of attention, warmth, support around that until it's either resolved or off your plate, or like you're saying, in the worst case, we can't accommodate this individual anymore. So that's a beautiful flow through of that high level holistic understanding to what exactly is each person doing, with clarity, transparency, and accountability all built in.
Exactly. And that multi-use nature, from the high level down to the details. You could use it for accountability, performance enhancement. You could also use it for actually crafting job descriptions for hiring, like you're saying. So you need to create a new role. The role description basically collects the set of tasks that you've done through your rhythm and cadence of revising, editing, and augmenting what the organization's needs are with regards to tasks. And so you can write that into a role description, maybe picking pieces from other people in the organization, tasks that they're working on, if it's an efficiency one, an efficiency hire, or augmenting team capacity. And if there's new tasks, that would have come out through that regular review. And then you could use it for onboarding and training. Same tasks are what set up the 30, 60, 90-day reviews for new team members. And you could set, individual goals against each of these tasks and accountability. And that creates a framework for communication. The thing I'd love to underscore is what you said about transparency. It's like knowing the ability to look across the organization, look at anybody in the organization, and have a list of all the things that they are accountable for at any one time. In my experience working with organizations, once they get to that level of kind of articulation of their org structure, that unleashes a lot of trust. It's like, okay, I know who is working on this. I know who's accountable for getting something done. And that level of clarity actually provides a sense of like psychological safety and relief to know that the organization has all these different things covered. So there's a bunch of different benefits that all are meant to contribute to well-being. And we started the session by saying like the big risk of not having structure is a breakdown of trust, unintentional breakdown of trust, because there's not enough clarity about who's doing what. And so balls get dropped. There can be redundancy of people saying, that's my task, no, that's my task. And we're kind of both working on it together. So there's some inefficiency. But ultimately, the lack of the ability to have transparency and accountability means that when stuff doesn't get done, even if it's for really good reasons, there tends to be some blame and some distrust that emerges that leads to a lack of commitment, a lack of clarity, and then a lack of moving forward, and then oftentimes conflict. And then from there, the organization might not be able to sustain. And we've just seen that pattern enough times to be like, yes, there can be a tyranny. I believe Joe Berkman wrote there could be a tyranny to structurelessness. So having some amount of structure, even in the warm, familial, communitarian environment that you want to have in an organization, is really important to have something that is clear. And again, we have lots of templates that you can get through the book, or certainly through the training that you could use to adapt to your own circumstance. But there's a lot of great literature out there and websites on some of the frameworks that we are advocates for, like sociocracy. Again, more of a governance system, but does have structure elements as well. So there's lots of different ways to approach this, but the key is to have some clear articulation that can be transparently shared throughout the organization. Anything you would add?
Yeah, let's talk about rhythms I think that's a real, because a lot of this can seem kind of, maybe high level or overly detailed or complex, but then how does it translate to like, what are you doing today, this week, this month, this season, this year? And so one of the ways we see to kind of translate this structure into operational reality and functional collaboration across the team is to design rhythms for different things. Yeah, thinking of the different levels and the different org areas, a common pattern that we see is on the what we call design level, or what sometimes is called strategy or management. We define it as vision, culture, strategy, and operational systems making up the design level. And again, depending on the stage of your organization, but these could tend to be longer rhythms. A great example is an annual vision and or culture retreat, or even a strategy retreat, right? Like offsite, get the whole team offsite and think about the future of the organization for maybe an extended period, day long, 2 day long, something like that. That's a great annual rhythm. Of course, if you're a young team, you're going to need to do it more frequently, but you can just think that would be hard to do on a weekly rhythm, right? So you have a longer rhythm for that kind of longer range stuff. Whereas on the revenue level, we have a product or service, we have clientele, there's likely daily and weekly rhythms to accomplish some of those things. So this idea of whatever department you're on or whatever tasks you have, setting up rhythms for either your own work blocks on like a personal calendar and work planning level, or rhythms for the team to connect and collaborate on certain things. Like, for example, another common rhythm is like a monthly governance or board meeting of, hey, how are all of the departments functioning on a monthly basis? How is the organization advancing towards maybe the strategic goals we set at the annual retreat? So a monthly rhythm, we have a board report and we can see all our metrics and we're reporting on wins and challenges and support needed, etc. There are some trends for how these rhythms are set, but the most important principle is that the teams are setting these rhythms and revising them as needed. One of the beautiful things that we've been doing a little bit of this lately internally at Lyft Economy is evolving the rhythms. So you can have a set meeting with a set team, and then one of the great results is actually maybe you don't even need that rhythm anymore. You don't need that meeting anymore. Or instead of a weekly 90-minute rhythm, you go to bi-weekly, or go to 60 minutes, or go to once a month, because maybe we've created enough structure and now we're reporting asynchronously, or we've kind of built that area of the organization up and we can move on to other things. So this idea of, and again, with the transparency across the team, you can see what rhythms the other teams are having, what rhythms are at design level, revenue level, admin level, and then updating and evolving those as they go. So that's a very powerful and practical way that this big org structure flows directly into regular operations. So curious what you might add about that, Kevin.
Not much. I think you got it. The emphasis here is if you find yourself asking who should make this decision, or who do we need in the room to make this decision, and there's lack of clarity, that should be an indicator that, the opportunity to work on your org design and your systems if it's not clear. And once it is increasingly clear, like Sean said, there's an evolution where you can push more and more of the autonomy and decision making to the people who are solving the problems, and less meetings. And that doesn't mean less and less collaboration. It actually means more trust, but you can actually get more done, if you will, to impact your community in ways that are beneficial to life, because you have these highly functioning, animated, inspired individuals who are working at the edge of the organization, and they have full access to the interior of the organization through the different rhythms and the way the organization is structured. So structure really can affect outcomes. And you can have highly functional, horizontal, non-hierarchical organizations where authority is delegated out and where there's accountability. It is totally possible, and it just is counter to most of the narratives of how business should work or how enterprise should work, or even how nonprofits and the nonprofit industrial complex work. There's an abundance of case stories we walk through in the book and in the training around a number of co-ops and organizations that have proven this capacity for non-hierarchical, highly structured, effective organizations. But I think that's the far end of it. The risk mitigation of like not having a structure is first. So start getting transparency and structure, and then as you evolve it, you can actually enjoy these tremendous efficiencies that, again, Frederick Laloux documented in Reinventing Organizations, actually from a quote-unquote competitive business as usual environment, usually outperform business as usual organizations in terms of metrics of resilience and sometimes earnings or profitability or whatever the business as usual metrics might be. But just translate those same metrics to impact, and that's what a Next Economy organization will be prioritizing.
I want to kind of lift up and celebrate one pattern I'm seeing some of our teams work on. You mentioned this idea of an annual retreat. Well, a lot of teams use that to do strategic planning, right? Maybe do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats, strategic planning, review, et cetera. One exciting pattern that we're seeing is teams actually getting really good, really functional, and actually doing that stuff in advance, right? And reporting out in advance, and then setting goals in advance, and setting strategic plans in advance. And then when they come together for the retreat, it's actually a party. It's actually a celebration, right? Hey, and almost a rubber stamp even. Hey, this is our goals for this year. Yay, great, we'll all do it. And then what do they get to do? They get to, team building, share some meals together, maybe be in a beautiful natural location, etc. So this idea of using the rhythms to invest in culture and team building, fulfillment and satisfaction, is kind of something that we can look forward to when we get this clear, coherent, functional organizational structure and rhythms. And then we can move on to like being ecstatic and loving our life and celebrating the beautiful impacts we're having in the world. That's something to like hopefully call you forward if this is feeling very complex and a lot of organizational and all this kind of details. It can actually turn into like a beautiful celebration of the people that you get to collaborate with.
I think it's a great place for us maybe to wrap this one up, is that beautiful vision for what an organization could be like with the structure that works, a structure that's effective for the impact you want to create, but still warm and familial, communitarian, and in alignment with your values, and ideally celebratory. We know it's possible. It's just not yet fully seated in our popular imagination. So hopefully this addresses some of the crisis of imagination, but again, we have some examples in the book and some templates for you to use if you're interested in going deeper. But certainly in the live facilitated training, we go through this at a much greater depth.
Thanks, everybody.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.